there. Welcome to the Author's Chaos. I'm SF Rogers.
And I am DL Golden.
And today we are answering the one question that I've gotten 4 times over the last week. How did you start your story?
It's a good question. We're just going to be talking really about generally getting started. How do you start out writing something like this? And I think we'll just go from there. If people have questions via TikTok, we will be on there and we'll be trying to answer those as we go. We have also got plans to be talking about what we plan on doing in the future here.
Yep.
So
yeah, for sure.
Let's start out.
So this week I was standing talking to a customer. I work in a customer facing job. Okay, y'all, like I'm a cashier. That's what I do. And customer asked me, well, what big life things do you have going on? Which is always kind of a, how deep do you go, right? And I was like, well, I have a book coming out. And I had one of my proof copies. And I was like, here, this is what my book looks like. And he goes, how did you start? And I said, what? He goes, well, I have a story idea. And he laid out, he has a whole plot. He has literally this whole story laid out exactly how he wants it told. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, why don't you just start writing it? He goes, what do you mean just start? And I'm like, just write a sentence. And he goes, well, I was a lawyer, so I write really good in third person. And I said, then write it in third person. Right. And he goes, it's that easy? And I said, yes. I don't know how else, like, I say just start, but, like, I don't know how many times I started and erased what I started.
I love the thought of, I write it in third person, and you're like, he's like, well, what do you mean just start? I didn't even consider what point of view mine was in. I just wrote it as it went. And it ended up being third person. But it's one of those things that I didn't consider that. I guess maybe that's the pantster in me. And I think that's just it. You just start where you can.
Yeah.
If you have a cool idea, a cool thought, a lot of times stuff that comes to me is a cool line will pop into my head. And I'll write that down and the scene will flesh out around that line, or I'll work to get to that single line.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that the goal is just to start where you can.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
whatever you have.
For me, if you read EOA, in that first chapter, one of the first paragraphs, the very first paragraph, says, I'm looking over the ledge of a waterfall. Well, are you coming? This is the statement that got me started on this adventure. That's the first paragraph in EOA. Yeah. That's the end of the book. I start with that opening scene. She's looking over the ledge of the water cascading over. That is the very last ending scene of EOA. In the epilogue is literally her standing there. So I knew where I wanted to end. Well, how did I get from, well, are you coming, to this point where she's off on another adventure? So then it was just building up, okay, what's the backstory? How did she get to the waterfall, right?
Right.
And then in the center, it becomes, okay, well, this is definitely the conflict. Like, this is where the conflict is going to happen. This is the thing that's going to happen. How did I get to this point? So for me, I look at it, no matter what scene I'm imagining, I'm looking at it in a very, I guess, forward-thinking way of like, okay, so if I have this scene, I need to be thinking about everything that led up to this that makes it so impactful. And it's just the way my brain works. Yeah. And for everybody, it's different. Like, this customer was telling me, he was like, I have a historical romance, which is not my forte. And I told him, he was like, can you just write it for me? And I was like, thank you so much for believing in me.
How much money are you offering me to ghostwrite your book? Because that's really the deterrent
that's
here.
Really the thing. But I told him, I said, if you have a scene that you want, you need to figure out where exactly you want it in the book and then write around it. And he goes, I can just start wherever I want. And I said, you can start wherever you want. That's the beauty of writing. You can just...
There are people I know that begin with their last chapter.
Yeah.
Like, they will write down, because that's the ending they have in mind. They'll write it down and then they'll go back and they will say, okay, how did I get to this point? Which is kind of what you're saying. Except for the fact that you don't write bottom up generally. You have an idea of where you're going to end and come to it, which is what I do as well. But there are people who write the last lines of the book before they get the actual story finalized or figured out.
Aaron asked, do you mean the idea for a story or starting to write a story? It's starting the story. Like, having the idea but not knowing where to start, Aaron.
We've talked about where the ideas come from before. Because it can be anything
Songs.
from a Nickelback song to reading Walden with your kids and thinking this is the most boring thing a fifth grader could ever read in their life.
To a Reddit writing prompt.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what the inspiration is for it, but just getting started, I think the issue is not ever imagining a story. I think human beings are wired to imagine stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think that all of us have these narratives running in our head when we see something.
Yeah.
Because we were a storytelling people.
Yeah.
Before before everything changed.
Yeah.
And I just think that a lot of people find it daunting to sit down and get those things down on paper.
Well, and it's also staring at a blank Word document or even a blank page, because I am one of those people that, like, if I have an idea and I don't use my notes on my phone. I'm a pen to paper kind of person to get an idea out. So, like, behind all of this, I've got a stack of papers there. Those are all notes for Ian and Maggie's story that I'm like, well, this is where I'm wanting to go. This is the research. This is what it's kind of my blueprint to lay it out in those, on those sheets of paper. So then I can go back and I can be like, okay, what was I trying to get out of this scene? But staring at that blank sheet of paper for the first time, and you're like, do I start with the dialogue I hear in my head, or do I start with like a description of what the room looks like? Like, where do I start this? And even like when you pull up the Word document, you're like, okay, I know these characters are getting ready to get on this boat and they're getting ready to sail, right? Like they're going.
Right.
But you're like, am I getting on the boat? Like, is that the scene that I start with? Like,
right.
But for me, once I get that word, that first sentence on the page, it's so much easier. People get hung up on that first sentence or first 1,000 words. And I'm going to tell you, while erasing 1,000 words or 10,000 words feels daunting, I promise you started. And your brain will kick into gear of, like, you can replace those 1,000 words. Like, you can change it. It can be polished. It can be better. Like,
yeah, it's nothing to type 1,000 words in an hour when you get into the flow of things.
Oh, for sure.
I think that it's very much a line of, if you think of your consciousness as a pipeline and you have this little trickle, if you just let a little trickle of water out the side, eventually it's going to flow out into this big thing.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just allowing that trickle to go somewhere rather than stopping it off and saying, oh, I need to focus on my work or focus on what I need to do.
Right.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is putting the thing down and letting that trickle start so that you can eventually flow into the bigger project.
100%.
Because 90,000 words is a lot of words. It's a
lot of words.
And it is daunting to write, but when you get to that point, it feels so good to know that this idea in your head has manifested into something that is tangible and physical and can be held and read, even if it's nonsense by the end of it.
Well, and I think you can agree that there's stuff that, like, there are scenes that I wrote for Execration of Autumn that didn't actually make it to what's now Final Cuts, right? Yeah. Like, there were scenes that I was super passionate about that, like, confused readers. And it was like, okay, if it makes sense to me, but it literally doesn't make sense to anybody else, I need to cut that. So while I'm looking at 2,000 words going, y'all, I can't cut to that. Like, I can't do this. Cutting those out opened up avenues for me to have a different type of scene that was more world building or that built up certain characters more, where I could go, okay, wait a second. So we can change this character's arc so that later in the book, the things that happen are more gut-wrenching or are more thought-provoking of, like, okay, hold on a minute, like, all of this happened to him, so this is where he's going now. It changed the trajectory of a couple of my characters where, like, okay, so I can cut out this scene that makes this person seem like they're one way and totally change who they are to better fit the narrative that I need them to fit.
Yeah.
It's having that gumption to, like, gut your ego that it's not perfect in that first 1,000 words or in that first 1,500 words, or you're like, okay, this is good, But what can I do that makes this better?
Right, and that comes from a perspective of editing afterward
No, yeah.
generally, and
If you're
understanding
editing
that.
during, I'm so sorry. Just stop.
Yeah, that's just going in and saying, okay, I know what I put down the first time made a ton of sense to me, but I can go back through and there are ways that I can improve this. It's having a growth mindset in that sense.
So when you started Origins,
hmm
you were with your 5th grade kids.
Yes.
They were reading Walden.
Yes.
And we've talked about this multiple times, how we came up with our ideas.
Yeah.
When you started, so anybody who's read Origins, I almost called it
Odyssey.
Anybody who's read Origins knows the first lines in your book are like what I would call like a mechanical voice speaking, or like a computer speaking.
Yes.
How did you come up with that?
So that indicator actually comes from the opening scenes of Kingdom Hearts 2. When you go in there, Sora has had his memory stripped away, and it's saying memory restoration at 15%.
Okay.
And then as you play through the tutorial, it builds in, and he regains it, and Roxas rejoins him. If you haven't played Kingdom Hearts 2 from 2005,
sorry.
But that's a lot of where that came from. But I thought, with it being a very isekai lit RPG style story, it needed to fall into. I needed to make sure that there were these little nuggets of things that said, this isn't quite the real world.
Yeah.
And I think that you get that hint at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then there are points like at the chapters that you'll see in the formatting. You can see that it's this kind of digital format, and then it switches back, and there's no mention of it being this digital virtual world again.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be hinted at, but not to give that away. And a lot of that is because I play a lot of video games.
Yeah.
And the point of a video game is for you to escape reality and not to feel like you're inside of a video game.
Right.
They just want to tell a narrative story, and I wanted it to feel like that. And so when we were reading Walden, I thought, well, what if this book had some kind of power to summon this loon that he's seeing across the lake, and that sprawls out and becomes this whole idea.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of it is just letting the daydream kind of run.
Yeah.
Letting it live and letting it grow and change and become a thing. Because so often we get into, all of us, I'm sure, stare off into space from time to time, and our brains go in this wild, fantastical thing, and then we shut it off and we never think about it again.
Right.
I think that the line is that if you really like an idea and you have been daydreaming about it and you're like, oh, I can't stop thinking about this, write it down and see where it goes. Worst that happens, you delete 1,000 words.
Yeah.
Or you never touch it again. Mm-hmm. You're not wasting your time. Right. You're only practicing that skill.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I'm glad that I went ahead and I wrote it down. I told myself that I've always wanted to get a full-fledged story out there. I got it typed up. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then I told you about it and it took off. And so it's one of those things that you need to be willing to let things grow in a natural pace and be willing to say, okay, this is something that I could continue to write about. I think that's where all starting begins. Just allow it to grow and allow it to do so naturally.
Well, and I also, just for like a tangent, your story doesn't have to be something that takes place over 4 books.
No.
You don't have to set out to write a series.
That is not... wrote 1, and she's happy with it being a single story book.
And here's the thing. There are authors that I am friends with who have written 20 plus 70,000 word books that are romances, cozy, cutesy romances that sell very well. That's what they like to write. You don't put pressure on yourself to have a Game of Thrones or Wheel of Time level series. Yes, I started a series, but I'm also, for the love of writing, have started 2 other whips that I'm like, super, I love them, but they're totally different genre than my high fantasy, than EOA is. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, if you love to do it, do it. Now, if I go back and I touch Ian and Maggie's story, I don't know. Probably. I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, Cora has my attention
Mm-hmm.
for edits and then getting started on book 2. So, like, but don't feel like you have to write something that's going to be a series.
Well, and don't feel like you have to write something that's going to be 90,000 words, 70,000 words. I don't know how many times I got online writing my first book and said, how long's a novel? How many pages is a novel? And every time it's like, that's not a question that makes any sense, because it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You don't judge a novel's length by pages. You judge it by word count.
Mm-hmm.
Generally. And then you get to the question, well, how many words are in a novel? Don't do that. If your story needs to be as long as your story needs to be. If it is a 1-chapter story, like we have written for other things, short stories, that's okay. It's all right to put out an 8,000 word document and say, here is a small novella that you can read.
Yeah.
You don't have to write something that is a 70,000 word thing.
You also don't have to stop at 100,000 words.
No, you can pile into 300,000 words
if that's
what the story needs to do. It might be hard to access. It might be difficult to get people to purchase, but a lot of us are not doing this because, we're going to get rich and be these millionaire booksellers.
Right.
You're doing it because you like writing.
Yeah.
Because you think the story you have to tell is worth telling. And I think that that's the point that you have to get to understand that you can't judge the success of what you're doing based on how much money it makes you.
For sure.
I still have not broke even on Origins, but I'm so happy that it's out there and that it is, people are enjoying it, people are liking it. When I put it out for free, I had 43 downloads.
Holy mackerel.
43 in one day. 43 downloads of the book. If even 4 of those people review the book, if even 10% of them think, wow, that was pretty decent, I might want to read Odyssea, I think my job is done.
Right.
You know, I'm not out anything. Mm-hmm. I've wrote it. I have people who've liked it. People have told me that they're impressed by it. That's great. Yeah. That's fantastic. If everybody and their dog hated it, I still would have gotten my 70,000 word book out there for people to read.
Right.
You know, and I did my best on that. And I think that's what people have to understand is we get into comparing ourselves so bad to other authors
100%.
that the fear of failure keeps you from starting. And how many times in life are you going to stand back and say, well, I'm not going to do this because what if it doesn't work out?
What if it doesn't happen?
Because it's free to publish on KDP. You don't have to have an artist for the cover.
Right.
You don't have to buy it. You don't have to get an editor. You don't have to do any of that. You could put out anything you want.
Have you seen
at whatever pace.
Have you seen the AI stuff that's going on?
I have. And they're making money off of it. So it's like, look, you need to be brave enough to get your stuff out there and understand that even if you get started, if you don't want to release it to the public afterward, it's okay. Sarah has a book sitting in her time capsule over here about a wolf man that falls in love with a girl. Okay? It may never see the light of day, but she's proud of it.
It's not about
it is about a wolf man. Guys, don't listen to her.
It's about a wolf woman.
A woman.
Who falls in love with a man. Thank you very much.
Sarah started the alpha male trend. That's the trick. I'm so sorry, world. I'm just saying.
You're gonna watch me red rum my brother today.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to become something.
But it doesn't. It really doesn't. And I have so many like short stories that I have like written down 2,000 words or something. Like I've written 2,000 words down.
Yeah.
Just started. It's simple. It's not deep. There's not massive things happening. That will never, like, they'll never go anywhere. They're not going to go on Reddit. They're not going to go, I'm not going to read them out loud on TikTok or anything like that. But I just needed to sit down and let creativity flow. And having written those things down actually opened up the floodgates for more writing on EOA or more writing on Shadow of the Demon King.
Like a palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to not step out unless it's perfect. And
Yeah.
if you never step out of the boat, you never know what's on the other side. Like if you never step over
Yeah.
the fence line, if you never step into the wilderness, you never know if the Fey realm's there.
Right.
If you never step to the burning city, you never find Amy and Michelle.
Right.
Like if you never do that,
Yeah.
you won't know.
Yeah.
And you will live the rest of your life wondering, if I would have crossed that fence line into the wilderness, would I have found the Autumn Court? Would I have been able to save?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like hypothetically.
And let me ask you this: your story appears in your head. You look out into the woods here,
Yeah.
and you see this, and you let it die on the vine.
Yeah.
What happens to those characters? You forget about them? They fade into the background in your mind? What is it?
I don't think, for me personally,
Yeah.
if I wouldn't have grabbed a pen and paper that day when I was sitting outside with my dogs in my hammock, if I would have never grabbed a pen and paper and wrote it down, I don't think I would have ever forgotten about Cora. I think that she would still be something that I imagined.
Mm-hmm.
I think she would still be something that every time I stepped outside, I don't think she would have ever gone away.
Yeah.
I think it would have been something, because of the way my brain works, it would have been something that I would continue to imagine.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to get away from her.
Well, and what right do you have to not give life to that thought?
Right.
You know, I mean, if it's come up and it's eating away at you that much, what point do you say that this is worth writing down?
Well, it's like Shadow of the Demon King. Like that got started because I was watching an anime,
mm-hmm.
and I was like, well, what if instead of, like, he's not a mage, he's a demon king? Like, what if a sacrifice is what actually brought her here, not the whatever bidding war that he wins for her, but like, what if it's this way? And it was one of those things where I sat down and I just started it. It wasn't supposed to be anything big, and then Fernando Raimo was like, I'm gonna write on it, and it turned into something that I absolutely love. That story.
Yeah,
I loved writing it because it was fun to write from a different perspective, romance wise.
Yeah.
Because EOA, they're an established romance, so there's not a lot of the game of like passing glances or touches or things like that. Whereas I could write that for Shadow of the Demon King. So like, but even then, I don't think I could have gotten away from Erlen and Bastion either.
Yeah.
When Bastion came, like the idea for him came to me, I could not get away from the way he looked, it's ridiculous how he smelled, but smells have a big thing in EOA too.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jim smells like cedar and patchouli, while Cora smells like lilacs. Like there's very distinctive things that I don't think I could have gotten away from had I just thought, well, it's just a passing thought. I'll be fine. I'll just lay in the hammock instead of riding in the hammock.
Yeah.
Like,
and there are surely a lot of stories, that a lot of imaginary things that have popped in your head that you've let go and that you've not thought about, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-mm.
You don't have to consume every waking thought with writing, but understand that if something sounds good to you, if it sounds interesting, if you think, wow, I'd really like this to become a thing, then do it.
Well, and like Ella just said, I have characters from freshman year of high school that are still with me. So my characters in Becoming Alpha that Dano makes fun of, those were characters that I created one night at like 2:00 in the morning after a study session in college.
Yeah.
And I looked at my friend and I was like, how cool would it be if, because Twilight was big at the time, I said, how cool would it be if the girl was the werewolf and she's being chased by this thing that they don't really know what it is.
Right.
She's falling in love. She's still in high school. I was fresh out of high school. I was freshman in college when I started the story.
Yeah.
So, but those characters, there's still parts of me that's like, hey, you had a really good idea. Like, could I essentially go publish that? Yes. Yeah. It's in a place where it could be published. It would not be a very big book. Yeah. It would be something short.
Yeah.
There's not a sequel to it.
But there's nothing wrong with a light novel either.
Right. Exactly.
That was, I went through, and my kids have been asking me, they're like, well, this book is 100 and some odd pages. And I'm like, guys,
That's
that
not.
doesn't matter because the font size, everything changes that. You have to understand the word count is what matters. And I look into books like Percy Jackson, which they consider a massive book. They consider it huge.
I love the Percy Jackson series, by the way.
7,000 words in the first book. 87.
And
My book's longer than
I
that.
currently have 2 books sitting on my stand out there next to, one is your wife's, one is mine, that are 900 and some on pages each.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of people get stuck in their head of saying, well, I could never do this. I'm not that talented to do this. That's
if
not.
I can do it,
That's the thing. If I can
it.
write something, you can absolutely write something. And write something that people have thought was cohesive and made sense. It's like, okay, come on.
And that they like the characters. That at the end of the day, I'm like, Daniel, Charlie.
Right.
I need more Charlie. Like, I have to have Charlie. And anybody who's read the book knows when I say Charlie, they know exactly who I'm talking about. And I know Ella's probably sitting behind her phone right now, like, yep, I know who Charlie is, right? But it's stuff like that, like, we fall in love with something about your writing. And I've done that with C. Britt's book. There were characters in C. Britt's book that I was like, no, right? Like, I like them. But there's also been books
I got things to tell you.
There's been characters in Sarah J. Maas's books because I've been reading ACOTAR.
Uh-huh.
I just started Crescent City. Wish me all the luck. But there are characters that even now I'm like, why are you the way that you are? I almost stopped reading when I thought something happened to Charlie.
Yeah, I was. I wrote that scene, and Christian Francis put out a video the next day. You never kill the dog. I was like, well, it's not a dog.
He's just a
terror
bird.
It's a bird. But yeah, I think that fear of failure is what stops a lot of people from beginning.
From starting, from
Because
ever
they're
even
like,
typing that first word.
This could be stupid. People are going to say something, and how many people are living with the trauma of they put all their heart into something, and someone went, "That's stupid."
Yeah.
What kind of idiot would write something like this?
By the way, if you're a person who does that, I hope you have the day you deserve.
Yeah, because
I hope you have the day you deserve.
We let that fear of failure stop us from ever beginning. But if you never start,
how do you know?
You're not gonna know. And I reiterate this to my kids. I don't know how many times. Failure is not a bad thing.
Well, it's also not the end.
Right? Exactly. It's like the sensation of pain. While pain sucks, you want that sensation. You don't want to be able to walk up to a stove and put your hand on it and not feel the heat from it.
Right?
You need to learn that failure happens, and then you can say, okay, why didn't this work?
Right.
How can I change this to make it better? It's about growing and not saying, well, failure is going to strip my heart out of my chest.
Well,
that's not the case.
And I think it's also understanding that in the midst of getting started, there are going to be people who come along beside you and say, okay, maybe this wasn't your best first attempt.
Yeah.
But it's your first attempt.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why we have all the technological advances and why we've been to space is because after the first failed attempt, we didn't just stop.
Right.
We didn't look at the rocket and go, oh, that exploded everywhere. Let's not do this anymore. We said, oh, well, we now know for the next rocket.
The explosion just has to go downward.
Not up.
Yeah.
And out.
And yeah, it's one of those things that I guess if I was giving any piece of advice, it would be just don't let that fear of failure stop you. And that doesn't apply to just writing. That applies to any creative outlet, anything you want to do. No matter how many times someone has put you down and laughed at you for what you've put out there in the world, there is someone out there who's going to like it.
Not even just
there's going to be a Sarah out there that's going to think that's good, even regardless. You know,
there's going to be a Daniel out there that's going to want to turn it into a manga. Like,
yeah,
someone somewhere.
You have to realize that even though you may think parts of it are not going to be good enough, put it out there, and if you fail, learn from the mistakes that you failed from.
100%.
And take it from someone who has taken his book down once already and republished it because there were formatting errors that could be way better, and someone who is considering taking it down a second time because he wants to get an ISBN for it, so that it can be put out other places. You have other chances. Publishing, hitting that publish button is not also the end of the line.
No, it's not.
It doesn't say that, oh, I did this and now I have to stop messing with it. Should you stop editing? Probably.
Probably.
But if someone comes to you and is like, hey, here's some advice for how to make this look better, or how to make this sound better, could you go back and fix something? Yes. And you know how much it costs to republish it? $0. You know how much it costs to publish it the first time? $0. You know how much it costs to publish it the 50th time? $0.
Ella says, especially with self-publishing.
Yeah.
And Aaron said, fail, first attempt in learning.
Yeah. You have to understand that scraping your knee is not a reason to not get back on the bicycle.
Falling, like, it's
Exactly.
get back on the horse.
Yeah, over and over and over again until the horse hates you.
Yes.
Figure it out.
Until
the horse is ready to obey what you need it to do.
Yes, you get back on the horse.
It's just a thing that I think it goes in so much
and I
stuff.
think a lot of people sit down and they have a very good idea.
Yeah.
And they allow rules and regulations and voices tell them, well, if you start with the weather, your book's automatically shit. Or if you start with an end scene instead of an opening scene, your book is not going to catch anybody's attention.
Right.
Or if you do ABC thing, or if you said I said too much, they're going to DNF your book. And all of these, like, literally, there are readers there are literally readers who read 300 books a year.
Yeah.
There are people out there who are thirsty for words, and they don't care if it's written by a trad published, indie published, double whatever published.
Right.
Like, it doesn't matter. They want to read, and your work is going to get out there. And a lot of the people who are harping on, like, don't use dialogue tags or do use dialogue tags, it's like, can I just write what I want to write?
And if you're going to stand here and tell me that someone can put a book out about a sentient door possessed by Zeus and that your book is garbage, either you're an idiot or you have no confidence in yourself whatsoever. Because somebody out there went, I'm going to write a book called Unhinged, and it's going to get super popular. And then it does.
And here's the crazy thing. That book, the minute you said Sentient Door, everyone on our TikTok right now was like, I know that book. I know exactly what you're talking about.
If you had thought of that thought, if that had come to your mind, and you let that die, what are you doing?
Right. If
there's no way that can succeed, right? But it does.
But it does. Because there are people who want to read.
Want something that absurd.
They want to read. Well, and it harkens to the fact that, like, it doesn't matter the genre. Sci-fi, all of it. Across the board. Fantasy, high fantasy, horror, gore, dark romance, cozy mystery. Like, you have so many options to, like, if you want to write it, in my opinion, just write it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Understand that you will find people who enjoy it.
Aaron says they made Sharknado.
Exactly.
They made Sharknado, and there's 4 of those movies, y'all.
There were people this weekend defending Madam Web on the internet, guys, and it was trash. So let's be very, very clear. There are people out there going to like.
We might have a biased opinion about Madam Web.
Check Rotten Tomatoes. But there were people out there saying, wow, this was a really fun movie to watch. I really like this. The general consensus is that, this wasn't any good. But there are people that like that genre.
So, and one thing that I point out to people all the time, opinions are very...
Like a-holes.
Personal. No, but they're personal, right? So, like, Aquaman, when I first watched Aquaman, it's a fun movie. It has no plot. There is no beef to that movie, okay? Like, let's be real. It's all about Jason Momoa being shirtless. If you have another opinion, I'm so sorry. It's mine. It's how I feel about it. Is it a fun movie to watch? Is it one that I don't mind if I walk in and Davey's watching and I'll sit and watch it? Yeah. There are other movies that I'm like,
right.
What are we watching? Like, what is happening right now?
The Door still has screenings in theaters.
Right.
Guys.
Right.
The thing is, you can't let let your own failures stop you.
Yeah.
You can't let that fear of not getting started stop you from beginning.
Well,
because you're never going to know.
And I am a firm believer in like putting your art out into the world because there will be someone who appreciates what you see through the lens of your writing.
Yeah. For Vincent Van Gogh's entire life, people called him insane, said his stuff would never sell. And now it is some of the most expensive art on the planet. And it is
so thought-provoking.
Yep.
And there are like, so I went to the Nielsen Atkins Art Museum in Kansas City last summer, and I stood in front of literally what my husband would call splatter paint. And I cried. I was standing with my friend and tears, and she was like, what is it about this? And I couldn't explain it to her, but looking at it moved something in me in a way where I was like, I understand this. And then there were other pieces of art where I'm like, okay, it's a duck. Like, whatever, it's a duck. Like, cool. But I think books are the same way. I think everyone goes through that where, like, there are a lot of people who will die on the hill of ACOTAR, that it is the best series ever. But then in that same group of people, they will read Crescent City and tell you it's not worth your time, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm finding there are a lot of people who really stand Iron Flame and Fourth Wing. I am not in the camp with Iron Flame. I'm just not.
There is no one in the camp with Iron Flame who feels like. I feel so bad about that, but it's just.
But it's the thing that, like, everyone likes different things. Just like horror is not a genre that I read.
No, mine either.
But
I would take any horror book.
Christian Francis's books.
Yeah.
I love the way he writes his horror.
Yeah.
I really do. I love horror written in the style that Christian Francis writes it. Biased opinion? Maybe. Have I read some Stephen King? Yes. Have I read things like the Amityville Horror? Yes, because I was interested in that paranormal side of horror. Have I read Amityville Horror to my husband? Yes. Is it something that I'm going to go pick up again? Probably not.
Yeah.
I can check mark that I've read it. Every book on my shelf right here is either romance or fantasy.
Yeah. Me not caring for horror books does not make Stephen King a bad author.
Exactly.
That's the trick. I would never pick up it, right? Yeah. But that doesn't make it not a masterpiece.
Right. Well, just like you'd probably not be a person found reading Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah. That doesn't make it not a masterpiece of a book. And that doesn't mean that... I don't want to say Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson? No, it's Jane Austen. Thank you. That doesn't make
Emily,
Jane
you can
Austen
kill your husband later.
That doesn't make her a bad writer because I don't care for that genre. Right?
Well, but it also harkens to, like, so I'll just use this as an example, the Star Wars novels.
Yeah.
Like the novels that come out based on, like, Leia and all of that. I've read a couple of those. They're really good. They're not everybody's genre.
Yeah.
Just like...
Not everyone's going to love everything you put
I have Isaac Asimov's I, Robot on my shelf. It's one of my favorite books. The movie had nothing to do with the books, but I love that movie too, right? It's two different forms of art. And I think if you have an idea, just sit down and get that first sentence out there.
Yeah.
Get that scene because you're seeing a scene in your head, or you're imagining something in your head.
Yeah.
A fight. What would happen if someone jumped off this building with a parachute after a bank heist?
Yeah. How many times does something come to your mind and you're like, oh, I could use that?
Yeah.
It's something really, really simple. Like, I saw you scroll through Facebook and TikTok and you see ads for games that do not exist.
Yeah.
And they'll have these great trailers where it's like, oh, that's a beautiful sunrise. It's too bad it's the last one we'll ever see together. Yeah. And that sparked something in my mind to write for my books. And it's like, take that inspiration where you can get it and use it to put pen to paper.
Right.
Or fingers to keys, whatever it ends up being. Understand that there's nothing wrong with putting something down, and if you don't like it at the end of the day, delete it. or
or
never put
burn
it out,
or don't put it out.
right?
Whatever.
But understand that somebody out there is also going to resonate with that line.
Yes. Oh,
someone
100%.
out there is going to say, "This was one of my favorite things to read
Yeah.
from an indie author." So maybe their favorite thing to read ever.
Mhm.
Right? And you have to understand that it's that Field of Dreams line. If you build it, if you make the thing,
If you build it, they will
someone
come.
will come to it. And whether it's only one person, that's worth your time.
Yeah, 100%.
Your ideas deserve to exist. They have a right to exist, and it is your job to make sure they get that far.
Oh, hi, Derek.
I don't know who that is. Hello.
Yeah, you know who that is.
Do you know Derek?
Yeah, he writes the dinosaur books.
Oh, I know Derek.
Yeah, we know Derek.
Yeah, I know Derek. I just don't know people by name very well on here. I am our father's son. Yeah.
I looked a guy in the face yesterday and know his name and said, "Hey, sir, how's it going?"
I will look at my students and go, "Hey, you." For 6 months.
I'm telling y'all,
That's bad.
I promise you, if you have an idea,
Yeah.
it's worth your time to at least get those first sentences out. It's worth your time if you draw. It's worth your time if you see it, draw it.
So let's answer that question then.
Mhm.
How do you get started writing a book? You just do it, right? I mean, you just sit down and have the tenacity to put the words down on something.
Even if I don't know where it's going and I have a scene in my head,
Write it down.
I will write it down.
Yeah.
And whether that's the beginning of the story or ends up being middle or end of the story,
Yeah.
that scene gets me started every time.
Yeah, and one small scene is enough to spark an entire novel. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, that line, "and tell me who do gods confess their sins to," drove the entirety of Odyssea out of my brain.
Right.
And it's like, that's insane to me.
Right.
It's that one spark. If you have an idea, allow that spark to flourish and grow. I think is all there is to it.
Derek said, "I finished a chapter of my whip the other day and thought, is this whole story trash?" I don't know.
Take a step away.
I don't know any author who
Yeah.
has not looked at something and been like, "I need to burn this whole story to the ground."
I think we're gonna wrap the episode
Yes.
here on Riverside. We're gonna stay on TikTok Live for just a little
Yeah.
bit longer, just chatting and talking if people want to do that. I am DL Golden. My book Origins Redux is a lit RPG story. It is available on Amazon right now. Go get it. Hardback, paperback, ebook, all that
Odyssea.
stuff. Odyssea is finishing up its final draft. I'm at 93,000 words in it, and I figure that I will open alpha reading to very few people in the probably next month, I'd say.
I'm SF Rogers. I have Execration of Autumn arc date set for March the 15th. Book will officially be released April 26th. Let's pat ourselves on the
There you
back.
go.
That's a huge thing. Have my first book signing at Cowtown Days in Baxter Springs, Kansas on the first weekend in May. I would love to see you if you want to come out. Daniel will also be there selling his book, and Seabrit will be there as well. We are so glad you joined us for the Author's Chaos today. And if you have anything you want us to talk about, we're going to do a Q&A episode here fairly soon. Send us whatever questions you want to hear us speak about here on the Author's Chaos. We're going to write them down on note cards and begin doing an episode a piece answering your questions. So any questions from writing to editing to formatting to publishing, just let us know.
Maybe we'll set up a Google form or something.
Yeah,
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Later, guys.